2021. What I want us to all think about is really our time is now. And I feel that really captures nicely where we are with our profession at this point, particularly given what we've learned in 2020. And as challenging as this year was and still continues to be for many of us all around the world, I'm sure you all realized we have just as much opportunity in that space. And a lot of things are happening that will emerge, particularly when we're thinking about how organizations and the global workforce is still managing to make that shift into sustainable growth for this year and going forward. And we talk a lot about, or hear a lot about development areas that have emerged, that have been emphasized quite a bit, such as resilience and productivity, engagement, well-being, first and foremost, and how people really bring their whole selves to work in terms of we're pretty much at home and we still have to try to come to grips with what's work and what's life, and how do we set the two together and thrive, and not just, as in many cases, really survive. So on that note, I want to actually invite you all to give some thought on your own of what you think may be some of the emerging trends when we're looking at this year and looking into maybe the next couple of years going forward. And I kindly wanted to ask Nanoa here to launch us with our first poll for the night. So feel free to participate, just give us some thought, a couple of different options there to pick from. I'm just curious how that will line up with the actual data that we have around that.
So it's what do you think might be most likely future coaching trend?
Yes, that's the first one. Thank you, Nanoa.
I'm hoping it launched.
I can see it.
Oh, phew. Okay, so disregard the bottom part. Just go to the question. Okay, so we got 6 people who have 7, 8, 9, 10.
Maybe just a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Group coaching. Just curious what people are picking. Group coaching seems to be the winner here.
We have 65% participation so far. This is anonymous, guys. You're not getting tested. There's no right, wrong answer. Awesome. Look at that, 80% now. Okay. Should I?
Thank you so much for participating. Yeah, we can probably move on. So we definitely have a winner here, group coaching. Followed closely by, I guess it's a tie between team coaching and leadership development programs. I wanted to just make sure, and please indicate someone if that's the case. Is everybody clear on the difference between group and team coaching? Since we listed both, if there is a question, please feel free to put in the chat or raise your hand. And meanwhile, I'm going to share the actual result. So in the one position, I want to say too here that there is definitely a significant distance between the first 3, then the following 4, and then the remaining, with the last one really being a very late follower. So when you look at the result here, in number 1, we have leadership development programs with additional coaching. We have leader as coach training, something that you probably also all came across already. And then team coaching. And again, the difference between team coaching and group coaching, just so everybody is clear, team is really an independent in itself. There's a dependency, there's a cohesion within a group that's working particularly on a project together, where with a group, you don't have that dependency within the group. You just have potentially a like-minded group of people that are interested in developing the same area. So there is definitely that difference. We will have more preferred certification that are being sought for coaches, particularly when practice managers are hiring. We will see increase in group coaching, internal coaching, and coaching for millennial leaders. As you look down, again, those are a little bit further following the coaching management. I'm wondering, okay, so now I had the poll still on my screen. I'm wondering if everybody is clear on coaching management systems. Again, feel free to put questions in the chat if there's something we're discussing here that requires a little bit further detail. We have organizations looking into streamlining coaching more with fewer vendors. This is something that's interesting because when we think about how organizations have traditionally hired coaches, you had a lot of different individuals that were able to participate in initiatives of organizations given particular background parameters that were selected. We see a lot more that process is being streamlined more, and that you will basically have a relationship, and then coaches picked from particular areas and a smaller group of folks that have worked together previously. A big trend is for sure app-based coaching platforms. So this is something that always causes a lot of discussion because, of course, it is typically a virtual offering, and it is at a different price point than usually what private practices are charging fee-wise for coaching sessions. We see peer coaching increasing, which is really part of getting coaching supervision. We're touching on that a little bit later here down the line. We have external executive coaching increasing, and we have, at last but not least, coaching fees to decrease. Sorry, there's actually a little typo here. Coaching will become a commodity was one of those things that were noted. And again, it's part of when you think about how coaching is offered, and particularly more so offered in the last year. We have a lot of different opportunities now to offer coaching as part of different programs, and most of those are currently app-based or online programs where you have partially coaching involved. And coaching sessions are a little bit shorter. They're typically not 60 minutes. They can be down to 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And there's a couple of different ways to add coaching. Very popular tool is on-demand coaching. All of that is currently being offered and starting to be offered more via app-based coaching platforms. Before I move on, again, any questions to any of the trends here mentioned, or does everybody get a little bit of a idea of what that looks like and how that could potentially, and we talk about that more going forward, how that could potentially impact your current practice?
Petra, if I could just ask a real quick question that appeared in chat. What was the source of that data and information?
Source of the data is the Coach Source report, and that's a survey that's done of about 19,000 individuals worldwide. Typically HR, practice managers, HR, and talent development managers and organizations that purchase coaching and have both internal and external coaches.
Thank you.
Purpose in the world disrupted. This is actually some data that I put together here from a couple of different sources, and wanted to just really start us out with what's actually happened in 2020 in terms of importance and purpose of coaching. And certainly a very powerful manifestation of purpose is bringing, as you see, economic and social imperatives together and drive change inside an organization as much as in society as a whole. And I wanted to bring the example here of commitments and values around DEI. particularly last year, as you all know, when organizations look for what are we actually shooting for here, what is really, so to speak, our North Star, a lot of organizations came out with, we need to do something around DEI. And what's going to become more and more important in any of these initiatives that are, of course, part of our development areas and coaching, and we think about DEI not just as diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also with the add-on of discovering or uncovering bias. There is discussion around psychological safety in organizations for people to actually contribute at their full potential. So this is a more complex development area for most organizations. And how do you really demonstrate a sincere commitment here and be authentic in your offerings and really demonstrate and role model a desire to bring about some change that's impactful, both for your organization and the individuals serving in it. So when you think about really some of the things that have established themselves as goals, how well do organizations do and fare in actually demonstrating that and really walking the talk on some of these values that have emerged for all of us around the events of last year? Oops, I think I was just one too quick. Hope you didn't see it, because I'm going to ask Nanoa now to help us with the second poll. And that one will be around primary purpose of coaching as per the study. And we're looking into external, internal coaches and practice managers here, and where the dominance was in those particular areas. So I invite you to please participate, look at some of those results, and click on the one that you feel like in your mind was one of those top areas or the top area.
Okay, I think we got 8.
Very cool. And I think that this really matches for the most part. I'm going to get us to the results here. It matches for the most part where we are. Number one was leadership development. Then we saw transition. Executive presence, I think, is here a little bit higher in third position than career coaching itself. You see, when actually, I'm going to zoom in there for you guys a little bit, if I can. Let me see. Oops. Trying to. How do I? Just trying to zoom in a little bit. I may have to just give you guys a little bit of this legend here by verbally. So what you see in the dark blue is the external coach, gray internal, and then this blue line here is actually the practice manager's perspective. So you see a slight difference here. Again, blue, the external coach, gray, the internal coach, and then the third bar is your practice managers. And you see a little bit of variation there, particularly here in the transition in terms of what was actually done and what were the topics that these particular individuals were actually asked to coach on. So that's where the difference came in. However, collectively, this is how it positioned itself with respect to primary focus on development areas there. The social enterprise in a world disrupted, I really wanted to bring that again into the forefront. Making the shift from survive to thrive depends on an organization becoming distinctly human at its core. And I grabbed some of these things, because I really felt they're really strong in terms of statement. When you think about a different way of being that approaches every question, every issue, and every decision from a human angle first. And I think that's something that we've probably heard before, and a lot of organizations have probably started leaning into even prior to last year and prior to the pandemic amplifying a couple of areas where that still needs to take place. But I think we've really finally now reached a point where most organizations realize, without putting everything really together in a way where it's human-centered, every change management effort and everything that we're actually trying to shift or pivot really needs to start with the people at the core. And that's where I believe we have an enormous opportunity to make impact and to be part of that shift as we do our work as coaches, working particularly with employees and leaders in organizations. Another very noteworthy aspect here, again, talking about what's happening in organizations and how do people adapt to where we are now. A lot of insight, of course, from what we learned last year, and the idea that we really do have a very big responsibility to support as leaders how people reskill and assume new roles, how we really equip folks to navigate what's ahead, because we can pretty much take for granted that there's going to be more disruptions of similar magnitude. And interestingly enough, I thought was that as much as everyone agrees that this needs to happen, 17% of those same executives that realize what organizations really need to do to get there feel that they're not, let me turn this around. 17% feel that their organizations are ready for this shift. So when you think about what that leaves us with is literally 83% of organizations worldwide that are still trying to figure out how to close that gap between what organizations are actually proclaiming and what employees actually experiencing as a result. So huge opportunity here, a lot of work ahead, and most definitely a lot of help that's needed to pull these kinds of initiatives off for larger and even mid-sized organizations. What I'm showing you here, and again, I'm going to help out a little bit. I didn't want to make this too much based on numbers tonight. Wanted to use here a couple of just comparisons in terms of use of coaching that has either increased or decreased over the last 2 years. And so when you look at the first pie chart here, this is 2018 to 2020. And then when you look into the expectation, of 20 to 22, so decrease of, expect companies' use of coaches to increase or stay the same over the past 2 years. And what I'm realizing here is I have to apologize. I missed the year, Greta, right? We had a year here. And I'm trying to figure out.
It was 2018.
It was 2018 to 20,
and
right? And then 20 to 2022. So thank you. I just wanted to confirm that. So what you see here mainly is we have had a increase of companies that are expecting. Here's the increase that has happened between 18 and 20. And here's the increase that expected from the current survey that's going to happen going forward. So we have definitely an increased appetite in continuing coaching programs and organizations and adding. We have a smaller percentage in comparison here of companies that either stay the same or do not increase their budgets for coaching initiatives. And we have a smaller percentage now than we had before of companies thinking that they will decrease their budgets for coaching commitments and initiatives. I'm thinking, Nanoa, we've also reached another slide here where I may want you to launch one more poll.
Okay. Is this the one where it says, which was the most common request for executive coaching in 2020?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. Okay. We got 90%. I think that's good.
Wonderful. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we also came again very close. I think what we have reversed is the first and second position here. We have actually emotional intelligence as our most requested development area, right in front of communication skills. So what I wanted you to look, what I wanted you guys to look at here real quick too, is there's a little bit of a difference when we're looking at it from the internal versus the external perspective. So what we see here again, the blue bars are actually the external coach's perspective. The gray bar is the internal or practice manager perspective. What you have here again is a number one spot, the emotional intelligence. You have communication as a close second. I think that's really close to our own poll here. Influencing others in a third position, and then executive presence as number 4. Any questions before I move on to any of the statistics that you've seen so far? And Greta, I'm going to have you keep an eye out on the.
Yeah, there's several questions, right, Greta? You're on mute.
Yeah, there are several questions. I thought that Petra wanted to wait until a midpoint.
Do we want to do that and just keep moving for now? Okay.
Well, unless you know, there are a couple questions about. Why don't we take these questions now, because they have to do with the slide at the beginning, if that's okay.
I'll be happy to.
Thanks. We've got the first question is from Catherine Burchard sort of towards the beginning of the deck. It's interesting to me that leadership development is so high. There are so many life coaches versus professional coaches. Although I wonder if the survey doesn't access life coaches as equally as professional or executive coaches.
Wonderful question. Thank you for it. That's something I should have really mentioned up front. And somehow I was so excited to get started, I forgot to mention. We will touch on life coaching trends as well, albeit in a little bit of a shorter format. So yes, these numbers are from business and career coaching. And that probably explains why you see leadership development still in number 1 on our earlier poll.
Okay, thanks. Also, does the purpose of coaching chart also reflect the demand of coaching in different areas as of now?
Chart as in this particular one that we start looking at?
It was the purpose of coaching. It was a few slides before.
Okay.
Does it also reflect the demand for coaching in different areas as for now? That's from Henna.
Demand in different areas as of now. So this is as of the end of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so as recent as possible, right? It is not yet, there's not yet data on obviously on going forward, but this is as things were by the end of 2020.
Okay. Now, if we could go to the type, if we could go to the use of coaching slide.
Yeah.
And was there a description about the type of coach on the use of coaching slide?
Type of coach, again, business coach, leadership coaching. That's organizational. Yeah.
That was from Karen. And from Raphael, is there any indication that the pandemic impacted negatively the expectation for companies to increase the use of coaches over the next 2 years?
I did not see that data, but that's something. Let us just progress a little bit. I don't think it's captured really anywhere, and I didn't get that data in terms of it actually impacting negatively as of yet. However, I could imagine as we are going forward and there's still concern in terms of repercussions economically, that some companies may still adjust things for this year. So all of last year, not. What we have seen is companies, being a little bit hesitant. And we've seen at the end of the year more of a, we're stepping up and we're finally ready to make a couple of decisions. So you had some decision fatigue a little bit in the beginning of the year where people were very uncertain and budgets became a little bit more uncertain. But you then had a pickup towards the end of the year. And we do not yet have the data for this year in terms of what budgets have started to modify or look like. But I would say we could potentially expect a little bit of an adjustment by the middle of the year if that comes into play, right? So if you see a little bit more economic uncertainty or anything that indicates more job loss or anything of that nature, that could potentially impact the numbers, yes.
Great, thanks, Petra. One last question that has to do with this batch of slides, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of the lead factors regarding the use of the external or internal coaches? This is from Karen. Idea of the lead factors for external and internal coaches.
Idea of the lead factors. I'm trying to understand the question.
Karen Gifford, do you want to, could you explain a little bit?
Sure. I was wondering as I'm looking at it, like the on change management, there's a lot more that change management tends to be done more by internal coaches versus external, and yet influencing others seems to come from, or executive presence seems to be more external. Do you know what the, maybe lead was the wrong term, driving factors are between what makes an organization decide to have an external coach come in for some things versus an internal coach?
That's a great question. So it usually is a lot of either or and not so much and. And what we see with this is there's a little bit of a difference, as we can all imagine. If an organization has an internal coaching initiative versus an external group of experts coming in. And as we know as coaches too, that external perspective is not only a very important part of the whole picture, but it also creates different sense of confidentiality and psychological safety. So we have a couple of different outcomes sometimes when we look at data of what is generated internally versus where people are actually gravitating towards if they're working with an external partner that is, hopefully neutral and not as some of your coaches may expect, right? When you're an internal coach, there's always a little bit of that hurdle initially of creating the confidentiality and creating that relationship that really allows for folks to really go into where they really need help most. So a lot of times when you work with internal groups, it's really a little bit more aligned with where the company is going and where the roadmap is that's agreed to, and that's part of the budget that particular department gets to play with, basically. And then when you have an external group, there's a different set of parameters, and typically people have a little bit more autonomy in selecting topics that are more around their personal as well as their professional goals. Did that create a little better understanding around your question particularly, Karen, or happy to? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, there's one last question quickly, also from Karen. Do you know who is being coached, C-suite, executive teams, or the next level down?
This is all a mix of C-suite executives, including directors, senior directors, VPs, and senior VPs.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep moving.
Next, I want to touch on something that's also going to be part of the conversation moving forward. And those are basically 5 workforce trends as identified by one of my most favorite publications each year, which is the Deloitte Human Capital Report. They do a wonderful job in really crystallizing out where are some of those global organizational focuses at the moment, and what can we actually learn from those bigger organizations that will express itself in the smaller and mid-sized organizations eventually as just as much. And first off is really the designing of work for well-being, or what we call the end of work-life balance. So when we look at the trend itself, organizations are taking well-being beyond work-life balance by starting to design well-being into work and life itself. So when we think about usually well-being was this extra add-on, but there was really not a concept of how do we create well-being for people on the job. In other words, how do we create just a better work experience for people? And what does that actually entail? What makes a better or really more uplifting, more empowering, more inspiring environment for someone? And what are the components? So surviving was the idea of supporting well-being through programs adjacent to work, where thriving, and this is the difference that we're getting into here with everything, what's surviving versus thriving, right? Thriving is really the integration of well-being into work through thoughtful work design. What does that mean, or why is that important? It's the idea of not just being able to work remotely, but maybe also having flexible schedule, right? So we don't have everybody to have to be on from 8 to 5, but we can really offer different ways of people coming together. We have, meanwhile, software that allows us to really begin, leave off, and start again without everybody being coordinated around particularly time zones. So we have really wonderful ability right now to think about coaching, for example, as adjacent to work versus integrated into work. And that's probably something that all of you have come across. Coaching people in organizations that feel like they have to squeeze their coaching session in either before or after work, or maybe even worse on the weekends, if that's when the only time they have left available, where now organizations really see this as they need help while they're working. They need help in a particular scenario, and you integrate that in terms of, for example, here on-demand coaching. So we have a much better look at how can these kinds of programs that are designed for that holistic well-being in terms of your productivity and your physical and mental well-being are so correlated. How do we integrate that and really, again, make for sustainable growth moving forward, particularly when we think about that enormous amount of overwhelm that most people experienced at work last year. And then the idea of, okay, how do I fit a coaching session into this on top of everything else, right? So a lot of times people had that feedback probably from coaches within organizations, because there was oftentimes a lot of overwhelm just trying to make time on the schedule for it. So there's definitely a new approach here. What I would like to look at second is beyond reskilling or unleashing potential, which is really the trend here is organizations need a workforce development approach that considers both the dynamic nature of work and the equally dynamic potential of workers to reinvent themselves. So when you think about surviving here again, when we looked at these two terms, surviving or thriving, pushing training to workers from the top down, assuming the organization knows best what skills workers need. When you think about that, that's typically been a traditional approach, right? You had a development program in place with organizations. Those are the things we want to highlight. Those are some of the gaps that we want to keep closing. And that allowed very little for customization or really supporting people in very specific areas that were very unique to that individual and that individual's role. And we're really pivoting. So here we have the thriving part, empowering workers with agency and choice over what work they do, unleashing their potential by allowing them to apply their interests and passions to organizational needs. And that's really where, again, as coaches, we really help to unlock that, right? We have really a lot of ways to create that synergy and really help people figure out what is important for them personally, how does that translate into what's important for their role in their organization, and what ultimately really makes them happy. I'm pausing here for a quick second to see if we had any questions. Otherwise, Petra, feel free to indicate if you see anything. Be glad to interrupt. Third here, I had super teams. That's something that you guys probably also came across already. Basically, the trend here is that due to the pandemic, organizations have learned that teams are even more important to thriving amid constant disruption, and that they might have a lot more impact than what was previously thought of. So there is a heightened focus on how do we optimize our synergy, our team dynamic, how do we optimize for collaboration and engagement within teams, particularly in remote settings. So when we're looking at surviving, that was typically the using technology as a tool to make teams more efficient, which is, I don't know how many of you came across new software last year or maybe slightly earlier, but we want to always make sure that we integrate humans and technology into that whole effort. So when we think about thriving with this particular trend, we're really integrating humans and technology into teams that use their complementary capabilities to re-architect work in more human ways. And again, that's a huge component for us as coaches to look at and say, when we do teamwork, when we do team improvement, when we do team building programs and sessions, what really makes the difference, right? Is it based on an assessment that you sometimes do, or is it based on, whatever the particular approach or method is that you apply for teamwork? There's a lot that goes into how do I help individuals in this team really bring their full potential and be able to contribute at their highest level, and how do I unlock that? So there's a heightened focus right now on developing those types of what they call super teams. Setting new directions for workforce strategy with respect to changeability and agility, future leader readiness, setting new directions for work and workforce. The trend here is organizations are looking for forward-facing insights about their workforce that can help them quickly pivot and set new directions, particularly in face of uncertainty. So agility, we've all dealt with that quite a bit in the last couple of years, the managing complexity, managing overwhelm. There's a lot that we're trying to figure out in terms of how do we really help make these quick moves and changes, in terms of how do we set ourselves up as a resilient organization? And I'm using resilience here both with idea of how do we create individuals and build their resilience, as much as how does that impact and enables us to create a more resilient organization. Surviving here is really using metrics and measurements that describe the workforce current state. And I think we all heard a lot about a shift, particularly in performance reviews, that those are actually being modified, that we're not so much just relying on constantly capturing data, but that actually when we pivot to thriving, it's more about assessing and acting on real-time workforce insights that can support better and faster decisions based on really understanding of what workforce is capable of in the future and how do we want to enable that better. So definitely a change here with respect to what have we done, particularly when it came to performance reviews and performance measurements, and how do we bring that more in line with really individual strengths and really move away from trying to aggregate things and creating programs that are a little bit one size fit all to a much more individual approach. Re-architecting work. This is actually a point here at the end that I think is super interesting, because it goes a little bit into what has happened to the traditional HR as a role in this entire setting of an organization, and how has that role shifted and changed as a result of what we particularly experienced last year. Given that a lot of those observations that were made really were findings that just got amplified as a result of the pandemic. Those were things that particularly in organizational cultures or in even in individual processes were probably not on the up and up to begin with. But if you go through a crisis, of course, those things get amplified, right? So we had out of a sudden a heightened focus on, okay, so this is really not working. Thriving here is really embracing an enterprise mindset that prioritizes re-architecting work in order to capitalize on unique human strengths. And what you probably hear me say here a lot is that individual, very customized approach. So in all of what we do, the idea is, yes, we scale initiatives, and yes, we try to capture more individuals within one initiative. But the focus is most definitely still on keeping these approaches individualized and customized to really enable that particular individual, again, to really contribute at their highest level. So for a lot of HR people, as a result of that insight too, you will see more and more, we talked a little bit earlier about the training that we do with leaders to really create that coaching habit and that coaching style of supervising and managing things. We see a lot of HR and talent developers now really getting coaching certificates to really learn more about that method and how effective that method is and why it's effective, and understand better that really with training, which was typically the to-go that you had in many organizations, apart from just compliance training, oftentimes you had workshops and then offsite retreats and training programs. You don't have that sustainable piece that actually gets the information to sink in and actually then change behavior and habits as a result. You have the forgetting curve kicking in after about a week. I think it's measured up to 90% of your training content is already kind of in one ear and out one other. So you will see that a lot more of the HR leaders will get more knowledgeable about coaching and actually embrace this approach more broadly in their organization versus budgets that were typically made available for training sessions and workshops.
Thank you, Petra. Quick question from Karen again. Can this slide on trends be shared with our clients? Again, the source is Deloitte Human Capital Report.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. That's it for questions.
And I want to move forward here with another quote that I really liked and wanted to share with you guys. In this particular case, from the CEO of ServiceNow. I don't know if anybody knows, not that big of a deal, but ServiceNow is a software platform that delivers digital workflows. And they are designed to create better experiences and unlocking productivity with power of technology. And I love his quote, we're in a world now that's all about people. We're in a truly human moment where any connection that doesn't absolutely lean into people will go nowhere. And I think this is really noteworthy to really look at and go, we have a serious shift in thinking here in terms of how organizations plan to move forward. And again, I'm coming back to my first slide. Our time is literally now. So just really keep that in mind. We have a lot of many around the world, a lot of CEOs and leaders that realize where we are and what needs to happen in organizations for us to all successfully move forward. Wanted to actually, let me just pause here for a second. Nano, we had planned a little bit of a breakout room at this juncture. I am wondering, are we ready for that? And just put our 2 topics in there for the breakout, or should we touch on it and do that after? Are you ready?
I can do a breakout room for sure. I just kind of need to know how many people you would like in a room.
I would say definitely, like we started out, maybe 3 at least per room. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many minutes we have. I guess I got to be mindful here of the time that we're at. But would love for us to discuss in a smaller group before I share some of those points, a little bit impact of both social justice movement and of course the pandemic. And if we want to split that and have a couple of rooms go after one and then a couple of rooms after this other one, and then compare notes coming back, that would probably work. So it gives every room enough time to just maybe stick with one of the 2 topics.
So would you like 2 breakout rooms, Petra, or several?
I don't know if that would be too many folks in one room. So that's a logistical question.
Yeah, so it would be about 10 people in a room.
Right.
Yeah. Would that be feasible, you think, guys? Or would we want to have smaller groups for that? Again, the topic is predicted impact of the social justice movement and predicted impact of the COVID-19 pandemic from last year.
Smaller groups, yeah.
Smaller groups?
Let's do 4 groups. Nano.
Yep.
Okay.
That sounds great. And so we have 2 each. That's perfect.
Okay, so we'll do 4 groups, and then for the first part, for the first session, let's say, how many minutes would you like?
I would say let's give each group at least maybe 5 minutes just to come up with some points in terms of where they feel maybe the top 3-4 areas that they feel there's going to be a measurable and tangible impact. And then we'll just compare notes real quick when we come back.
Shoot, you might be right. Hello, welcome back.
Hello. Where's Petra? I don't see her yet. Anyway, we were starting to have a really great discussion in my room about diversity, equity, inclusion, and then we had to come back. So that tells me that there's a lot more to say.
Are we all still on share? Do I?
No.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, good. Okay, so sharing some results. First two groups were talking about social justice. I broke this one down again a little bit into a couple of different areas in terms of how people actually responded here. And this is, again, a compilation of a couple of different reports, including the coach source. So for sheer volume, I thought this was significant, and again, included that for that reason. So what we see on external coaches here is the increase, and there are a couple of things that are very, very similar. I want you to pay attention to some of the finer differences between the three categories. And as you see through here, of course, as expected, an increased demand for coaches, particularly a coach cohort that is reflective of the diversity of the organization. So organizations are getting more and more specific on, particularly when they're hiring third-party expertise, that they want to have that reflect the diversity within the organization. So we see more and more companies that are really, particularly also on the coaching front, that are looking to increase their diversity within their coach communities. We have obviously an increased demand for coaches with training and knowledge in DEI. And I think this is, again, something that is a little bit different than maybe done before across the board here, which means we had DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, oftentimes as a check the box kind of initiative, right? So we had organizations that knew, okay, we got to do something here, but you know, we'll just do what we probably can get away with, and just can say, okay, we did offer this program, or we did offer the training. And what's oftentimes missing is really, you know, how do I do this in an authentic way? And more importantly, with the intention to create a different experience and ultimately a different culture in this organization. And that's where really a lot of these things that came to the forefront as part of the unrest last year is when these things are not presented in an authentic way, people can look right through that. And they can experience within their organization, yeah, okay, you know, there's a heightened interest in getting women into management, or getting women into senior management or leadership positions. But really, when it comes down to making decisions, what's their ability to really weigh into the conversation? So things don't happen overnight. I think what we've learned from a lot of the feedback here on this front is that it's a more complex topic that really requires a broader initiative, and something that's definitely beyond a 1 or 2 session workshop, something that could, as I mentioned earlier, potentially include uncovering bias and really looking at how do we come to the decisions that we make, right? And what's impacting those? And how do we create psychological safety for people to actually do participate in conversations and bring things to awareness that may otherwise, you know, fear repercussions. Another thing is, of course, empowering communication. You know, how do we really equip people to speak up and really take initiatives, and really, again, how do we get away from checking the box and doing a compliance initiative and instead really leading an initiative? And what would success look like for that organization once they're taking the initiative, right? What would that success actually look like, given, again, the fact that it always starts with self, right? So what can we realistically expect to happen? What's the time frame? And where do we start to role model what we're really trying to create?
Petra, quick question.
Yeah.
Could you please explain what a practice manager is? This is from Lois.
Okay, Lois, practice manager, thank you for the question, is typically the person purchasing coaching for an organization.
Thank you.
Most welcome. Any other comments from the two rooms to this particular topic? Any other observations you guys made, or anything else you would like to share here, just around what that could look like going forward based on what we learned?
Petra, this is Rafael.
Yeah.
In our room, we share a couple of cases, similar cases, where clients were, the clients in non-profit organizations at a leadership position. And in both cases, they are in a position of uncertainty on how to approach the expectations from the general employee population, and how to bring either the board or top leadership and try to take a position vis-a-vis those expectations from employees. So as a coach, or as coaches in our case, our challenge has been to coach our clients to help them figure out how to navigate those waters, and where people bring their own personal expectations versus the organization position or the organization institutional approach towards diversity, inclusion, and now social justice.
I'm just trying to make clear, Rafael. I understand exactly what you're asking me. Simplify this for me one time, like just the last part.
It wasn't actually a question, Petra, and perhaps that's why it wasn't that clear. I'm just I'm just sharing that another potential impact for external coaches is to get pulled towards coaching leaders in organizations that they don't have an idea of how to navigate. On one hand, expectation from a group of employees, on the other hand, the reaction from top leadership.
Okay. Yep.
And it wasn't a question, just sharing.
Absolutely, understand. Yeah, no, very, very good observation. Thank you, Rafael. It's kind of the gap that I touched on a little bit earlier too, right? There's this idea of this is who we want to be as an organization, and then the gap in terms of what do our people actually experience, right? That actually are here employed. So yeah. I'm moving on in respect for time with the predicted impact of COVID-19. We have, I've actually bundled this here across the board because we really had the same outcomes on all three fronts. Particularly what it means with respect to technology and coaching. So of course, there are going to be more initiatives. There's going to be more support that organizations will offer. And a lot of it will go into increase in virtual coaching or at best coaching. As I said, too, another trend here is on-demand coaching so that people have access, just like other apps that you probably are familiar with already. Like one is Mindspace, I believe it's a meditation app. There's a couple of other things that some organizations started adopting and buying subscriptions for as part of their benefit programs for employees. And we will see an increase there in those kinds of support measurements. We will see, as a result of that more ad hoc or on-demand and more frequent coaching, there's potentially a decrease in the duration of coaching. So when we have sometimes a flow where we typically have 60 minutes, this may go down to 30 or 45 minutes. It's increase in the number of coaching programs. So we will see different programs being offered that target very specific outcomes. We have an increased demand for internal coaches. So we will see more and more companies really building their own coaching practice. And we have an increased demand for coaching in wellness or life coaching and life work balance. So again, there's going to be a more holistic view on how do we make sure that people fare through these kinds of disruptions and these kinds of changes with their physical and mental health intact as much as their engagement and productivity. Looking ahead, I'm going to share a few things from the very recent report that ICF made available. This includes, obviously, and was added to the existing report just to show a little bit more data around what the general outlook is amongst the coach community worldwide with respect to how will we emerge as an industry. And as you see here, and I think these things are all very positive, and I love to share this, very much confidence around, that this will become even a stronger industry as a result. So, and this again is a global viewpoint. I think that really says a lot, and wanted to share this simply to show there's definitely a lot of confidence around, growth that we can expect in this industry in the coming year and 2-3 years going forward. Over the next 6 months, coaching will still have a role in the organization I work for. Again, this is just to show a little bit of confidence around where people are currently, what's happening in those organizations, and do they feel confident that these programs will stay in place, that there will be budget to continue on, and more importantly, that these things actually show success and result based on which these things will be extended and expanded. Internal and external coaches here, like the role of coaching within my organization, will become more important. As you see here, again, I like to see that 43% agree and 22, so you got 65% really strongly or agree generally that there will be a heightened importance around coaching programs in organizations moving forward. Coaches will have to invest more in technology as a result of the pandemic. I thought this was very interesting, and probably something that you all have come across multiple times by now. Couple of different ways to address this. I don't want to get into too much detail, but most definitely something that we all had to start embracing more and more this past year, and get ourselves set up with all kinds of ways to connect with folks if we weren't able to meet.
I hate to interrupt you, but we got 2 more minutes just to time. I don't know if you want to take a couple last minute questions. You did plan on making the slides available, right? I know you've got a few.
Yeah, and I apologize that with the breakouts and everything, we got a little bit long.
No, that's okay. There's just so much to talk about. So would you like to take?
And I think the deck will help some folks to dig into it a little bit further. What I can do is just introduce quickly a little bit around life coaching here that I promised at the beginning, so I don't want to leave that out completely. When it comes to life coaching trends, I want to touch on a couple of things here with respect to, how, for example, differentiating virtual coaching. How do you avoid Zoom fatigue, while becoming more virtual? How do I create some interesting interactive sessions to boost engagement? All those things are definitely becoming more and more important. Get a good reading on body language, ensure equal contribution when you're coaching teams or groups. So those are all things where we have to really spend some time on, how do we create our sessions when we're virtual? Another big point here I want everyone to remember is we're getting more and more, this is actually, there's an additional slide here in the stack for you guys to review around measurable results. being able to measure and being able to establish a value for not only what you're coaching, but also how that impacts that individual's business or personal life. There is value we can attach to these things. And it's definitely worth thinking around, how do you create a value proposition that really shows some dollar figures. It is mostly helpful, or used to be more helpful in organizational proposals, but it is becoming more and more as people use, they're looking for very specific help in very specific ways, and they want to see upfront, how that's going to be delivered and what that actually looks like. A third point, authenticity. I think we all realize, particularly with virtual coaching, show more vulnerability. Clients want real people. I'm going to touch on Brené Brown's first TED Talk here that she was devastated at first about, and I think was the power of vulnerability. We don't have to be perfect with everything. It's just really, you want to be more real and really show real life rather than, sometimes maybe more analytical or theory sharing of programs that you are certified in. So always know there is definitely a heightened need and demand for authenticity in coaching. Another one here is social media with authentic content that's going hand in hand. If we're a little bit past the, posting articles or having presentations that are kind of recycled. People want to see some real stuff. And if you want to get into the conversation, I wanted to actually initially get our wonderful marketing director, Lori Banks, involved here. She is absolutely on the forefront on some of those new tools. Please reach out to her, learn about new apps like Clubhouse. There's a lot happening, and very, very authentic content there, and a lot to learn on that front. Last but not least here, maybe quickly, productization and online tools, scaling your approach through online coursework and some automated processes. Think about subscription as a software as a subscription to capture different time zones, languages, income levels. So you will really get a lot more out of engagement and so on by investing and looking at how can I scale what I do in a meaningful way. And last but not least here, think about inclusion. And what we just got a little bit into in our breakout room, how do we all as coaches benefit from an increased understanding, and how do we enter into conversations around race and gender and thought diversity? And I want to really underline thought diversity here, because when we learned one thing last year was the politicization that we had, polarization actually around politics is what I meant to say. It makes it sometimes difficult for us to have coaching conversations, because we get personally drawn into something that we either agree with or are absolutely not agreeing with, and that can really make a difference in how we engage in our session. So those are just some real quick pointers. I wanted to give a few more minutes, Greta, for some last questions. So I'm going to stop us here. And again, make that deck available for you guys to look at some things at your own leisure.
Yeah, thanks, Petra. Thanks everyone for being here. There are no more questions in the chat box. Everyone, feel free to stay in the room for the next 10-15 minutes. We're going to close the meeting right now.
Yeah,
we're going to act as though we were all together at an in-person meeting. So if you want to mull around for a few more minutes and say goodnight, talk to Petra or talk to anyone, feel free to stay on. There are several of us who are going to hold the room open for the next 15 minutes. So thank you all for being here. Look out for the survey. We really want to hear from you about what you'd like to see us do. And we're going to be sending out your CCEUs and a link to the recording slide deck that Petra has so graciously offered to share. And there's lots more information in this deck that we didn't get to. And be on the lookout for our emails about upcoming events. Next week, we've got a great webinar on content marketing. Then on February 18th, we have a really cool speaker coming, Michael Bunge Stanier. And this was Petra's doing. She's special events director, as you know. He's the author of How to Tame Your Advice Monster. And he's a really big name in coaching. And all the coaching chapters in the western part of the United States are pooling together to bring Michael to talk to us. And really, if you haven't signed up, please do so. It'll be really a fun afternoon. And February 23rd, another webinar on energy leadership. So check out our website, our events page, and we hope to see you there. And again, feel free to stay in the room for 15 more minutes or so. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.